the weirdness of the Zoom thing that we're all getting used to.
I'm a bookseller at Boswell Book Company, coming to you from my living room. However, I want to let you know that today is day 4,155 that Boswell Book Company has been a bookstore and been in business. Chatting tonight with Christina Clancy, Wisconsin's own author of The Second Home, which, like I said, another book I loved and has been a huge hit at Boswell. We're really happy to welcome Kirkland Hamill, an author of another book I loved, Filthy Beasts. In fact, usually I'd hold my copy up here, but you're going to have to imagine it because I loved it so much. I passed it. There we go. See, I loved it so much I made somebody else read it and passed it on to them. I know Christy's going to do a bit more introducing here in a moment, but let me just quote myself with my review of Filthy Beast. Hamill is that rare beast, see what I did there, the most generous kind of memoirist, so opens up his entire world to you without hedging or over-explanation and trusts you to understand it. Particularly sensitive is Hamill's writing about brotherhood and the childhood traumas which resulted from necessary self-preservation, yet delayed his own self-discovery. An honest, elegantly bold book. Please give them a virtual welcome. Christy, take it away.
Great, thanks everyone. It's so nice to see everyone on the call, and thanks for joining Boswell. Most of you already are very familiar with Boswell. I'm actually drinking out of my Boswell mug right now. For those of you who aren't from Milwaukee, Boswell Books is a beloved institution. It's really kind of the beating heart of the east side of Milwaukee, and they've been a great home for my book and lots of other books. And Kirkland, I'm so excited to invite you here to see you all the way from Baltimore for this event to talk about your book. I met Kirkland last January when we were at a big booksellers convention, and right away, we were sitting next to each other at a table, and right away I liked him. I just knew we were gonna be friends. And so I couldn't wait to read his book. And when it came out, I was one of the first people to order it. And when I was talking to Daniel, I said, I just love to do an event with Kirkland. So I'm so pleased that we're here. And I'm gonna ask if it's okay, Kirkland, if you could read a short excerpt from your book. You know, it's funny, I was thinking, I've been going to a lot of these Zoom events. And at first I didn't hear very many authors read. And then lately I've been hearing authors read again a little bit. And I always love hearing the text in the writer's voice. And it also gives a nice introduction to your work. So if you don't mind, that'd be great.
Great, absolutely. So I'm starting from chapter 1. There is a prologue, but so I don't have to set anything up. And I'll just get right to it. I remember them laughing. I was a 4-year-old boy dressed in a pink halter top and miniskirt with pearls and heels, a cardboard gay liberation sign hanging around my neck. I wasn't sure what to make of their laughter. I was making people happy, but it seemed like their sharp cackles betrayed something other than joy. It was the first time that I had been the subject of adult laughter, and there was something sinister about it. The laughter spiked when I wiggled my hips as instructed, making it difficult to stay balanced on my mother's 2-inch heels. My 7-year-old brother, Robin, wearing a dark suit, his hair combed down like a Wall Street banker's, walked beside me. My mother laughed the loudest. It was the annual Labor Day skit at our Adirondack Hunting and Fishing Club. More than 100 people lined both sides of the enormous main room of the clubhouse to watch individual family camps perform cute skits, using props like deer antlers and fishing rods. Puns like, "There's something fishy going on," or "that was unbearable," accompanied lighthearted stories acted out by loving parents who swam after their kids in fake trout fins or chased them draped in grizzly pelts. Earlier at our family's camp, my mother had kneeled down to dress me, giggling like a naughty schoolgirl. My father rifled through his closet, trying to find a necktie that would fit my older brother. "But I don't want to," I kept saying. "Oh, hush," my mother said. "It will be fun." I was bouncing up and down and twisting my body back and forth. "Hold still, Kirkland," she said, her giggles elevating. "You're going to lose your, oh my God, you're going to lose your top. Bobby, you've got to come in here." "There's my pretty little boy," my father said as he walked into the bathroom. "I'm not pretty," I yelled. "You look like a hooker," my father told me proudly. "His boob's sticking out," my mother cried. "It's not funny," I said, stamping my foot, yet at the same time cracking a tentative smile. I didn't know what gay liberation meant, but on some level, I knew that I'd been chosen over Robin to be the girl. It felt like a warning, and a little bit of a punishment, and I sensed the injustice of being made a prop for my mother's amusement, but I delighted in how happy it made her.
That's great. Thank you. It's a powerful scene. And it's a nice way to start the novel. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your book? And before we get started, I just also wanted to just say there'll be opportunities for questions. So at about, in about 30, 40 minutes, we'll break and see if you guys have questions. So feel free to make this as interactive as possible. So tell us about your memoir and how, I guess, like with a memoir, there are so many ways to think about whether there's a moment where you thought, now I have a story, now I understand that there's a story here that I can tell, or did it start out as like an essay that you thought could become a story, or, what was your hook for your memoir?
Yeah, well, it started out, I decided, my brothers and I'd been telling my friends my family stories forever. And I just decided at one point I was going to write them all down. So I sat down and I was working at a job that I wasn't, thrilled with at the time. And I would come in at about 8 o'clock and I would close my office door and I would write for 2 hours. And I would tell one whole story. So, it wasn't very long, and I just gave myself the 2 hours to do it. And by the time, at the end of the week, I had 5 stories, and I just decided to put them online. Open Salon, which was part of the salon.com website. That's sort of an open thing. I don't know how I found it. And so I submitted them all, I think on a Friday morning. And by that Friday afternoon, the editors of this Open Salon site had chosen them all and put them on the website of this blog thing. And other people started reading them. And I started to get reactions. I'd been telling my friends these stories forever, but it was the first time I'd gotten reactions from people I didn't know. And, they kept saying like, oh my God, what happens next? What happened after that? You can't just leave it like that. I mean, what's next? And so that's when I thought, okay, I want to turn this into a book. And I was so naive, and you'll find this funny. Any writer will find it funny. My thought of doing a book was that I ended up with 20 family stories, and you take them all and you put them in order, and you add a little connector sentence or two, bind it together, and there you go, you have a book. So I had a very large pamphlet at the end of that process. And there was so much of it, I decided, because I started with the funny. I was telling these, what I thought were really hysterical stories, and the reactions that I was getting were all over the place. People saying, that's the funniest thing I've ever read. And some people saying, oh my God, that's the saddest thing I've ever read. And I thought, okay, there's something that I was personally missing about this. And so when I decided to do a full memoir, when I fully understood what that meant, I knew I didn't just want it to be the funny things and be sort of tone deaf about, because the book's a lot about addiction, and my mother was sort of the main character, and was a very bad, not bad, but just a troubled alcoholic. She had it the worst of anybody that I've ever known. Not that I knew that when I was growing up, and the thing about growing up with an alcoholic is, some of those things are outrageously, absurdly funny in a darkly comic way. But, it's a very tragic disease at the same time. So the book really is about my relationship with her and how I navigated just a very confusing external existence with all of this stuff going on, while I was having a really difficult time understanding internally who I was, and how do you pull all those things apart to figure out, who you actually are.
Yeah, as the child of an alcoholic myself, and there's so many connections that we have with this book, and I think anyone who reads it will also find their own ways of connecting to different parts of the story. But I appreciate what you were saying about it being funny to some and tragic to others, and I think sometimes that's where you are when you're processing your own story. When you've told the same story to yourself or to friends over and over and over again, it can seem like it's funny, but to other people, it's just sad and poignant. And I've had that same experience having, if I tell stories about my dad, who is an alcoholic, who actually died at 51 because he was an alcoholic. I think sometimes that can happen. So I also was kind of curious, you know, I think you and I were born just a few months apart from each other. That's another connection that we have. And one of the questions someone asked me about my book, which I thought was really interesting, because they were saying, you know, since we're the same age, they were saying, is there a certain age where, like, you couldn't write this memoir when you were younger? And it's not just because you've learned how to think about your story, but also there's a certain reckoning that happens in middle age. And I find myself thinking about that over and over again. And like, do you feel like you reached a point in your life where you had, is this in any way a reckoning with your past?
I think, you know, one of the things, and as you know, being the child of an alcoholic, you know, there's so much healing that needs to happen. And I just find it really interesting that, you know, we talk about alcoholism as a disease and the alcoholic is a sick person, but we don't treat them like they're sick. You know, and there's a good reason for that. A lot of alcoholics are very damaging. They can be extremely, you know, horrible. They can be hurtful, and, you know, all of that is part of the disease. So, you know, it's just, in order to get to a point where you can separate out and, you know, what the illness is versus that person actually doing something that's harmful and hurtful to me, it's very difficult to write a story about it, because when you're in the middle of healing from it, it doesn't make for very good writing. We've all read those things where somebody has, you know, they're still wounded and they're writing something and it sort of dies on the page. So it did take me a long time. It did take me up until now to get to the point where I really genuinely could see my mother with compassion, genuine compassion, and heal enough from the pain of it and the pain that she caused me, and really see her as a victim of this disease, as was I. It was the disease that I was the victim of, and my mother was the carrier of it, the main carrier, but I then became infected as well. Like all family members of alcoholics, you become part of the alcoholic system, and you become as sick in a different way as the alcoholic is. So it did take me that long to get to the point where I had enough perspective and enough distance and enough compassion to be able to write a story about her as a real human being, keeping all the painful parts and not shying away from how difficult that was for me at the time, you know, that it was happening.
And while you were writing, was it, you know, when I was teaching creative writing, I found it kind of difficult sometimes to ask my students to dig deep and like get to the underbelly of a story, because some students would re-experience trauma. There's a lot of pedagogy, you know, around that. You know, if you do that, are you re-traumatizing yourself, or are you working through something that was hard and coming to a clearing? Because I felt like when I read your novel that it had a story arc, you know, the way fiction does.
Yes.
And I saw that kind of acceptance that you just talked about. But was it traumatic to write? Did you find yourself like you'd get your head so into your manuscript that you would sometimes be in a funk, or could you distance yourself to write?
Certainly. I mean, I definitely felt the feelings as I was writing it, but I didn't shy away from it. I sort of, I viewed that as healing. You know, it was difficult and painful, but I'm really grateful for it. I think there are a lot of people who go through their lives and are impacted by something so confusing and so traumatizing and difficult, and they don't dig deep enough to the point where, you know, they are then influenced by those things that they don't, you know, unless you sort of figure out what's going on and why you are acting the way that you are and why you're feeling hurt about something or why you're overreacting to something, you know, you are sort of a prisoner of that. And I got to a point where you know, it was sort of a selfish thing. Like, I want to live the happiest life that I can live. And if this is the way to do it, then I'm going to do it, because I don't want to be subject to those mysterious forces that I don't understand. And so, yeah, I can imagine, you know, deciding at some point that you don't want to go through that. And there could be very good reasons for that the ones that you're talking about. But I think if you're going to be a writer, and certainly a writer of a memoir and probably novels as well, there's no other option, because unless you bring people with you into what it was, there's no way to move that narrative along and to really bring people into your story. So yeah, and I was very ambitious too. I wanted to get this story down and I wanted to get it right. And that ambition, coupled with my personal selfishness about wanting to live an authentic, real, truth-based existence, were the primary motivators.
It's so interesting too, I think, because you're doing this intensely personal thing when you're writing, yet now you're on the other end of it, where you have readers who are reading your story. And one thing I thought about that was so cool, it was like this revelation, was memoir is so, and I haven't read memoir for a while, and I loved returning to memoir through your book because it was so honest and so candid about your experiences. But I thought memoir is nice because you know that the writer's okay.
Right.
Because they have to reach a certain point in order to tell the story. And it actually almost in a way reminded me of why, like with my own book, I have a prologue. In a way, I never knew this until I thought about this in terms of your book, but you need the reader to know these characters are going to be okay. They're going to be at this point, and then we're going to go back into a hard time, but then we're going to bring them back to where they're fine. But I wrote an essay about my dad's alcoholism and what it was like being a teenager and experiencing that. And one thing I found that startled me so much, because I was kind of embarrassed to share it. I remember when it was published, it was in the Sun magazine, and it was out there for weeks before I ever posted it online, because I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want people to know so much about my own life. Because I think when you have an alcoholic parent, it becomes this kind of like embarrassing thing that you don't want people to know. But people were so responsive to that essay. I think whether they had an alcoholic parent or not, I think they could share so much of that vulnerability and that seeing the weakness. And have you been receiving a lot of feedback from readers who are just so thankful that you told your story because it opened up their own story for them?
I think, yes, I've gotten a lot of great emails, and, as I said recently, a lot of them start with, my fill in the blank was an alcoholic. And then they start telling their story about that. I think the thing about it that I really sort of understood early on, and I'm not sure how, but that the shame of alcoholism, certainly within the alcoholic and within the people who love the alcoholic and part of that system, I just, at some point, and through Al-Anon probably, because I went to Al-Anon for many years, and that literally changed my life. Just recognizing how damaging and corrosive shame is. And so there was something about doing the opposite, which was saying, I'm not going to be ashamed of this story about Winnie the Pooh, which for anybody who's read the book knows that story well. I'm not going to be ashamed of my budding sexuality, because everybody's sexuality is budding at some point. That was the other thing. It was like, I know people are having these same experiences. People may not talk about it. People may not want it in book form for everybody else to read, but I know they're having it. So there was something about it that I was just kind of okay with it, because I was like, okay, I'm just being human, and I'm just being sort of publicly human about it. And something very healing and continuing to be healing about shedding light that just, gets rid of all of that stuff. And you realize, that's everybody. That's, I'm not telling some dirty little secret that everybody's looking at me and clutching their pearls. They're going, oh yeah, I have my own Winnie the Pooh type story. And so, I don't get wagging fingers at me. I get a lot of, oh my God, this is what happened to me. It was great, because people telling their stories is the healing part.
Absolutely. And, I just want to say, I loved your book for so many reasons, but one of the reasons I loved it is because you reveal things that are really honest and hard, but you don't only focus on that. You also can back away. It never feels like you're just trying to crucify people in your memoir at all. And in some ways, I think you show your own foibles. as you go through that. And then also it's just beautifully written. You're not just writing a story about what happened to you, but you have this wonderful prose. And every now and then I just underline a sentence or two where you would just describe things. Like one line that I just loved is when you were talking about class. And we should talk maybe about your riches to rags story. Cause I actually, like, I knew this was about your mom, but I also thought it was more about like class. I thought it was more like a riches to rags story. But when you said, I was attracted to people who challenged the status quo while remaining within it, a balancing act I was trying to perfect myself. Like, just that's such a nice, succinct way of describing, your own relationship to class. Can you talk about your family's fall from riches to rags? Because you weren't just rich.
Yeah, I mean, at some point we were, richy rich, like the old money, we weren't Rockefellers and Vanderbilts, but we were in the sphere somewhere on the lower edge of that sphere. But, that sort of New York City based aristocratic, blue bloody, the stuff, which, is annoying. Even just saying it, I understand that can be annoying to a certain extent, just to, but the rags part. So my father, and I talk about this, he sort of grew up and he was sort of encouraged not to go to school or get a job because his father was like, that's what other people do. You go to college so that you can get an education so that you can work to make money and support your family. And that's not something you're going to ever have to worry about. And of course, so, both my grandparents die within a year of each other in the early 70s. And my father looks at the bank account and, my grandfather had like 4 yachts over the course of his life. And anybody who knows anything about boating, the old adage that it's a thing that you throw all your money into. And, they lived this lavishly extravagant lifestyle that was also sort of understated at the same time. That's another part of sort of the old WASPy thing, was that it wasn't ostentatious, but it cost a lot of money to do the things that they were doing. And, then my father realized he was in his mid 30s. He had no background in anything. And the marriage crumbled pretty quickly. And my mother, who he met at 19 years old, came from a working class family, but she took to that lifestyle in epic form, and she was really, really good at it. I mean, she was just one of those women. She was beautiful and glamorous and sophisticated and funny and sort of easygoing funny in that way. And, when there was no money to support it, and my father, had all of the personality deficits that comes with somebody who's sort of pampered and spoiled their whole lives, it just crumbled pretty quickly. And we went to Bermuda basically poor. And we had all this cosmetic wealth around us, the shirts that we wore, the clubs that we had been associated with, and no money. And my mother just eventually, that living that life, she realized she couldn't do it, or she didn't want to do it. And that's what, the story is really about, how she sort of self-destructed from there, and how she, sort of brought us along. And her story arc is really, how do I get back to what that is? Because she didn't know how to live without it. Do
you think your mom would have had issues anyway? Like, do you think she was mentally ill? Do you think her alcoholism, if she'd stayed with your dad, if they hadn't lost their money, I know it's hindsight's 2020, but.
Yeah, it was a boozy culture. They were, and one of the interesting things that's happened since the book has come out is hearing all these people who were part of my parents' world. And they said, we were sort of a freewheeling, fun bunch, but your parents were on another level, because a lot of the people that they were friends with had jobs. They had to wake up in the morning and go somewhere. And, people would talk about how my father would have 2 different parties. There would be the one that started at noon until 3, and he'd be plastered and nap for 2 hours. And then he would wake up and the next party would happen. And that was what they did. And they had the means to be able to do that. And they were, in situations like that, they were the ones, everybody came to their house. It was always, they were sort of the party givers. So yeah, I think eventually, that is a very hard lifestyle to maintain, and it would have caught up.
Yeah, I felt like I was drunk when I finished reading your book. I mean, just the tipping back, the martinis, it was, and the pre-parties before the weddings. You write some great wedding scenes,
yeah,
which is pretty amazing. And so your brothers have had issues with alcoholism. Can you talk a little bit about that? And we're both middle children, and we both have, like, you have all brothers and I have all sisters. So that's, I was interested to think about how you as a middle child with brothers who are alcoholics, like how come you're not, like, or maybe you are and you didn't write about that, but
but I'm aware. One of the reasons why I'm probably not an alcoholic is that I'm aware at any moment that I'm susceptible to it. I understand the genetics of it all and the family disease part. So I'm very aware, and I'm constantly checking in with myself related to that. I think, I've a lot of people have asked this question, and I'm not really sure what the answer is. I think one of the things is that I was sinking so quickly. And I think I was thinking so much more quickly than they did, because the sexuality part was, part of that. And I didn't understand that part of myself. And so my freshman year of college, I just sank like a stone. And I was either there was no other option. I needed help, or I was just going to die on the vine. I mean, and so I found Al-Anon really young at 19. And I put there's a scene in the book related to that where I'm in this Al-Anon meeting with 45 to 70-year-old, mostly women who were married to alcoholic men. And I'm this 19-year-old guy, and we were the same. All the circumstances were different, but the stories were the same. And I was like, oh my God, this is, because, very well, you can feel very isolated in that experience, and you think you're the only person going through it, and you're the only person who could ever understand. And then you get into this room where everybody has the same story, a variation on the same theme, and you're like, oh my God, this is everybody. So I think that early intervention was a part of it. There's probably some of the middle child stuff. And I think also, my brothers could, maintain for longer than I could, because they didn't have this other aspect to their confusion. So yeah, I think that's what it is.
it's interesting, like, just hearing you talk about this, it almost sounds like, having this problem, like, or not problem, but like trying to figure out your sexual identity, because it's so heart-wrenching in the book, with you trying to figure out, like, am I gay? Like, you keep asking everybody, and I
know.
in a hall of mirrors.
Sounds great. Being gay sucks. So perfect. Thank you for that answer. Yeah.
Well, because we're the same age, I can relate to, it's funny, because I was thinking that some of what you write about might sound kind of politically incorrect to young people. When you talk about some of the, racial epithets your mom would use, or, the waspiness and the way people would talk about gays, being gay. But I remember growing up, like the words that were used, and, it was very secret. It felt like the stakes were very high if you were going to come out as gay. And I could see you struggling through that. And because I've lived through that time, I felt extra compassion for you, I just wanted to read, I love this line when you talk about gayness, when you're trying to figure out your sexuality, where you say, I hated war movies and buddy cop shows. I never played with toy soldiers. I didn't think the Marx Brothers, Benny Hill, or the Three Stooges were funny. I thought burping was gross and farting unforgivable. I love the Carpenters, the movie Beaches, Wonder Woman, Judy Blume books, Stevie Nicks, Madonna, the smell of hand lotion, talking about my feelings, Air Supply, dance routines, and movies where men fell in love or cried. That's so moving, because you're looking everywhere for some sort of pattern or system that you can fit into that helps you figure out who you are.
And I think, a lot of LGBTQ people don't really understand, because now, you can turn on anything and there are gay characters who are complex, and they're, effeminate, and they are very macho, and they're all different colors and all different sizes. You know, when I was growing up, it was in the 80s, Boy George was at the top of the charts, and everybody thought, okay, he just likes to dress up. You know, there's nothing about his sexuality there. You know, George Michael jumping around in the hoops and the little tiny shorts. Liberace wasn't out as a gay man. And anybody who's seen Liberace, it's the most ridiculous thing to think that he could be anything other than gay. And not to stereotype, but yeah, I mean, there are stereotypes sometimes for a particular reason. So I was looking at all of this and going, I don't see myself out there. So this can't be what's going on. And that's where the external thing comes in, because there's all this craziness in my family. I'm going, okay, well, these feelings that I'm having are because, you know, there's that part in college where I really connected with Ethan. And, you know, the just those intense feelings I was having for him, I thought were, okay, I'm this needy, codependent person because, you know, I grew up in an alcoholic home and I want to be just like him. And so I admire him so much. And I didn't know, you know, that was being in love with somebody. I had no idea. I thought, okay, this is just what being a wounded, broken person, that's how they feel about the person that they want to be more like. So it was very confusing for a very long time. And, you know, I didn't come out until I was 30. And I think there was a reason for that, you know, because as you're saying, there is no safe space. And so people who did come out during that time, incredibly brave, taking huge risks. And I needed to be secure enough in myself to get to the point where I knew I was going to be okay. And I didn't consciously know that. It's not like I knew I was gay and was hiding it. My mind just sort of didn't let me know it until I think I felt safe enough to know it.
And as dysfunctional as your family is, and I don't want to give too much of the book away, but as dysfunctional as they are, it seemed like they were pretty supportive.
Yeah, I mean, I do talk about that sort of coming out process to them, and you know, our family were brutally honest. They were brutal. You know, there's a lot of brutality to that honesty, and it was sort of ruthless in the sense that you couldn't have your feelings hurt, because as soon as you had your feelings hurt, it was like chum in the water, and you know, people went for you. But there is some honesty that comes along with that, and a thick skin that you develop as a result of that. So I thought, you know, I really kind of, and I say in the book, my family didn't really have the discipline to, you know, wage a campaign against, you know, a gay person in the family. Would be like, ugh, you know, what are you going to do? Was basically the thought. There was more of it than I thought there was going to be, you know, especially with my mother. And I talk about that a little bit with my older brother and my younger brother, you know, which is sort of a hilarious scene. I mean, he was pretty homophobic until I came out, and then it was like just a complete 180 and never again after that. So there was enough sort of weirdness and just characters, so many sort of rich characters in our family, that I thought, okay, this is just another rich character that, you know, gets to be part of the craziness. But there was some, you know, it was not all that way. There was a little bit of adjustment. My mother never fully adjusted, but, you know, she could dislike somebody for all sorts of reasons. And, you know, gay was just mine. Not that she disliked me, but, you know, she could complain about, you know, anything. And the gay thing for her was what she was complaining about for me.
Yeah, and I want to open this up for questions in a second, but before we do, I was kind of curious about this. When you said, you were talking about your coming out, and you said with your mother, another great line from your book, when you said, a mother like you should have a gay son. My God, a mother like you makes a gay son.
Yes.
And I was thinking about that, and I thought, you know, like, as a mom myself of kids, like, is that fair to say that a mother can make a son gay? Or is it like, what are you drawing on from that? Because it's so interesting to me, and it was funny. I laughed out loud when I read that, but then I was thinking, what is that? Like, what do mothers do that can make their sons think that they caused them to be gay.
Yeah, so first of all, it's not fair at all. And I don't think it's actually true, but I did say it. So I put it in the book. And I said it because, she was a ball busting Betty Davis, late era Betty Davis character. And, in gay canon, they are, it's Betty Davis and Mommy Dearest and Judy Garland, all of these very damaged, incredibly interesting, compelling women who are sort of the people that gay men are drawn to. And, I could speculate forever as to why that is. And I'm sure it's been written about a gazillion times, but so she was one of those characters. And, I think there's an old idea that these, very dominant mothers, there is a connection between gay sons and dominant mothers. I don't actually think that's true. But yeah, at the time, and I said it because, as part of our family, the way we interacted with each other, and I write this later in the next paragraph, is I said, I wanted her, if she was going to judge me, I wanted her to judge herself just as harshly. So I wanted to bond us together in my gayness so that she couldn't judge me without judging herself. So it was somewhat of a strategic thing to say and an unfair thing to say at the same time. But, we played unfairly all the time in my family.
Yeah, no, and I like one reason to read this book, you find yourself just waiting to hear what your mom's going to say next. Like, I just wanted her to enter the scene, and when she's there, you bring her to life. And you also show that kind of closeness between the two of you, as like there's distance, but also closeness. And I think that, it's hard, I think, when you're a kid and your parent is an alcoholic, you see how you're frustrated because you want them to be the parent that they should be. Mm-hmm. And then when you get older, I think you see them, like you were talking about earlier, through this lens of compassion. Yes. Where you understand that their lives were hard. I think that way about my dad, and I can tell you do about your mom just from the book. It's so compassionate, thinking about her plight.
Well, up on the fantasy of who you thought they were. They are who they are. I mean, that's one of the things, and that was so pivotal with Al-Anon. They're like, okay, you think you can get your mother to stop drinking. You can't. You think once she stops drinking, everything's going to go back to normal and you all are going to be, this happy family. No, you've got your own problems and you need to focus on that and let your mother be exactly who she is. And if she wants to get help, she will. And if she doesn't, she won't. And she will be exactly who she is. And you can't do a thing about it. And even if you could magically do a thing about it, it's not going to change a thing about who you are. And you think it will. You think you could be reparented or whatever, and it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to have these fantasies when I was growing up that I could go and just learn. I didn't know how to cook, but I had this persistent fantasy that I could just go to Denver where my dad was living and make him a pot roast. Mm-hmm. I just was like, I could fix him. I could make everything right. I'll just make a pot roast. And I wish I had gone to an Al-Anon meeting because I never thought what you thought. They are who they are until I was much older, until I was in my 40s.
Oh, it took a long time. I mean, I'm not saying it happened right away, but I did get there. And I learned, it's like you're talking about going and I can cook him and I can fix him. I'm sure your experience with that is that you think you can fix people. And as soon as you think you can fix people, you start going off in tangents all over the place and it just messes your life up. So, I was just very lucky that I got that help early on and stopped the patterns, because that's one of the things, is just stopping the pattern and stopping the behavior, helps to heal you even if you don't do anything else.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great message to carry away from the book. We have some questions, and somebody had actually emailed some questions beforehand, so I thought I'd also jump in with this one. But if you guys have questions, please either add them in the chat or we can call on you. But somebody had asked that, they said that there were tons of great reviews of your book, which there are, and you had a lovely article in the New York Times about your book. And they said, but what's the worst review you've received? Because I would imagine that when you write a memoir, it's like with fiction, you can maybe not take it as personally. You're like, well, this isn't a story for you. But with memoir, it must feel very personal.
Well, you'll get a kick out of this story. So literally, I think the second review on Goodreads was a 1-star review. And this woman wrote a long paragraph, and absolutely every insecurity I had about my book, she nailed each one of them. Oh, it's a poor little rich boy story. All the characters in this book are horrible. You're not rooting for anybody. I don't know how he got a book deal. It's just sort of a sham. It's a dark hole of a story. And I mean, it just went on and on, literally, because, there's been very few people who'd read it. This was when the advance copy came out. So it was just brutal. And I made the mistake of responding to it, which I've learned a lot about that since then. And I was trying to do something funny, like, oh, haha, it's a poor little rich boy here who shouldn't have gotten a whatever. And, I looked on your website, it looks like you make a great dandelion chicken salad. I thought I was, doing something funny. And then these other comments started coming in like, oh, angry author alert. And, oh, I was going to read his book, but now, I'm so put off by how he's reacting that, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to tell nobody to read it. So I learned very early on. And, I was talking to a friend of mine, she said, when you're writing your first book and nobody knows anything about you, you don't think of yourself as somebody who is a public person in any way. I thought, I wasn't, and there was nobody who knew anything. And she's like, you're going to have to start recognizing that has nothing to do with you. And you have some power here. And if you start to engage in this sort of back and forth, you're going to be perceived very poorly, and rightfully so. And so that was really helpful, and she's like, it's not your business what happens here. It's nothing. It's not to do with you anymore. This is out of your hands, and you don't engage, and believe in yourself. Just because somebody doesn't like it. I read so many books that people have thought are the greatest things in the world that I haven't liked, and that's going to happen. And Goodreads is the place where you say that. So, it was a really important early lesson. And it was also like, I've got to get over myself. Like, I just heard the worst that I could possibly hear, and I survived, and it's going to be okay after that.
Well, I think especially when I don't read my reviews at all anymore. But when you first start getting reviews, I think you're waiting to see like, what's the zeitgeist? Like, what's the general consensus going to be? Is my book good or not? And so you can't, I can imagine that 1-star review probably was very bruising emotionally. Right at the beginning, you're so excited about having your book out there, and then boom, somebody says that. So, and
you think, okay, that's going to be it. The publisher was wrong. I've gotten good reviews from professional reviewers, and they were wrong. I mean, the general public's going to hate it, and they're going to hate it for all of the reasons why I was worried that they might hate it. Rich people, nobody's rooting for rich people. And I was like, I was looking at this woman, I was going, I was probably a lot poorer than you growing up. I mean, but I can understand why I was perceived as this, poor little rich boy thing. I got it. But it was also, it hurt my feelings.
Yeah. I'm a pretty tough skin. My skin's like leather now. Somebody asked if you stay in touch with Ethan.
Oh, yes. So that was interesting. He and I are in touch maybe every 8 years or so. And, when the book came out, I sent him an advance copy, and I got a phone call from him, and we spoke for an hour, and he's like, first of all, I want to tell you that I loved your book. I mean, just as a reader, I loved your book, and I finished it, and I picked it up, and I started reading it again. The second thing I want to tell you is I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't remember that, because there's a scene in the book where, he says something pretty devastating. He's like, I don't remember saying that, but it's absolutely likely that I did, because at that time in my life, it's something that I would have said. And, I'm just really, really sorry that really stayed with you for so long. And, I tried to, explain that that's, what happens, and I'm okay now and whatever. He's like, no, I don't want you to let me off the hook about this. It was brutal. And I just, it's going to stay with me that happened. And as much as I was trying to sort of say, it's okay. This actually is part of the whole journey that was really important for me. And that's why I loved him, because he is that type of person, just who was like, I'm taking responsibility for it, and I'm not going to let you not take responsibility.
When you wrote so much about your loneliness, so movingly about your loneliness, I was so happy that you had Ethan in your life, even if that was kind of a thwarted friendship in a way because of all the conflicting feelings and the trajectories your life took. But
yeah, he was one of those characters, and I, described the fact that I wanted to be like him so much, and I really wanted him to love me, that he was very inspiring and compelling for me to get better. Like, he's not going to love me if I'm not better than who I am right now. That was incredibly motivating for me to get the help that I needed to be better.
oh, that's amazing. I hope he's watching, or we'll have to send him a recording of this.
I'll tell him all this on the phone. So even if he is.
Tell him we all are glad he was there for you. And then somebody said, if your mother were able to read your book today, what do you think the first thing she would say to you once she finished it?
It's all made up. And none of this happened. It's probably the first thing that she would say. Yeah, I think that would be it. I mean, I think she would, my mother was one of those people that, would completely, and she'd probably believe that none of it happened. But then there would be a part of her that'd be like, oh, would sort of embrace it at the same time in that kind of celebrity way. Cause she wanted, she walked around like she was a celebrity. She sort of lived her life like she was, Beyonce, going to the Academy Awards every single day. So, I think there's a part of it that she would have gotten a kick out of, being known.
I would have loved to have heard her respond to it. I just love the way you write about her. We had another email that came in, and if there's somebody had said, as a middle child, you thought you had to protect and perhaps save your mother during her divorce, alcoholism, and herself. What were the things you had to retrieve and learn about yourself later for your own well-being? I realize you found Al-Anon and you needed to look out for yourself by setting boundaries, but are there things like shame and guilt that follow you still? So we talked about some of that, but I'm curious about that. That's an interesting question about whether that follows you.
I've really sort of pulled out a lot of it. I don't walk around with a lot of shame. I think I understand the illness pretty well, to know that shame is just something that gets deposited in you as just living in that environment. So yeah, I don't walk around with a lot of shame. I mean, and not a lot of guilt either. People have asked me, and I think it's a valid question because I read about people in the book, and, there have been one or two people who haven't been thrilled about it. And I have a lot of compassion for that, because when you write a memoir, you're not telling their full story. You're telling their tiny little arc of story in the way that it related to you. And so there's a whole story, a background, and things that have happened since then that's not told. So all the names are changed, except my direct family members, partially just to protect people, but, people can figure out who other people are. So I don't feel guilty about that. I understand it, and I'm empathetic to it. So yeah, that's.
Before you published the book, like once you had your book contract and you knew this is, wow, this is really going to be a real thing, were you nervous to show your book to people who are going to be mentioned in the book?
Well, I showed it to my brothers, and well in advance, so that if there's anything they really disagreed with, they could talk to me about it. And it didn't mean necessarily that I would take it out, but I was certainly open to it. And my younger brother had something that was perfectly reasonable, and I did shift that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, they were sort of the two that were the most important. My parents were both dead, so I didn't have to pass anything by them. A lot of my relatives who I wrote about are no longer with us. So most of the characters weren't with us anymore, and the important ones I did let read ahead of time. But, I also take full responsibility for it. So even if there is a negative reaction, I let that be, and I can I can be okay with somebody, not liking it or complaining about it or telling other people it's horrible. I think it's totally reasonable. I put it out there. Everybody's, especially the people that I wrote about, have every right to say, you know what, I didn't like it. I don't like you. And I think that's perfectly, fine.
Yeah, it's really hard to mark your place as a writer. Like, this is my project. I'm writing about this. It's my story to tell. I can tell it. I'm sorry. It's interesting that you have to create those boundaries. We have just a few more minutes, so 2 more questions have come in. Are you friends with Kevin today?
I am friends with Kevin. Kevin is a wonderful, very, very good friend of mine, an amazing guy and a great friend. I think Kevin's actually watching right now, so he
Kevin
may
is the best.
question. Kevin, love you, Kevin. And I joke with him because I was like, we would have these discussions like, I made you pretty funny, because when you do dialogue in a memoir, you don't, of course, record everything. So you have to get the general idea of what happened in there. I was like, you were a little bit of a dick when it came to that moment, but otherwise I tried to make you funny and engaging and understand why, somebody would fall for you.
That's so great. Don't you just love your friends so much when you publish a book? Like, my friends have been so supportive of my book, and haven't you felt like when people join your Zooms, or like, I just love my friends even more than I ever thought I could.
Well, I have friends who have been almost on every Zoom call. We talked about that before, and I see one of them right now, and I can't see everybody, but it's unbelievable. And I'm so grateful. And when that 1-star review came out, I sent out a blast, like, you need to get on Goodreads right now and, 5-star me up. And I did. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. So this last question, how much of your dysfunctional former self do you still find you bring into current relationships?
Oh, I'm sure there are things, but I became, and this drives my husband crazy, like, I became one of those people who's like, we're not allowing any conflict to go untalked about. So it almost may be on the other side. Like, he's like, okay, all right, we don't have to do a whole federal issue out of this particular thing. And I'm like, no, we got to make sure that we're okay. And, I want to communicate this very clearly. And I need to hear from you, blah, blah, blah. So if anything, it's that, I've become one of those people who is so like, okay, we've got a little thing here. We need to nail it and take care of it and talk about it. And that's probably, and I'm sure if he were on the call, he would mention a whole bunch of other things that aren't occurring to me right now, but I'm sure he would have all sorts of things that he would add to that.
We're all dysfunctional in our way, however we got there.
It's part of it, right? Because, you're not going to be perfect no matter what.
Right. Well, I want to thank Boswell for doing this. I would get a Boswell tattoo on my body. I love that store. So I'm really happy that people joined in. And I know it's so wonderful that we're supporting an independent bookstore. When we met at the bookseller conference, and we were in Baltimore in January.
Very important. Support your local bookstores.
I really can't thank Boswell enough, and thank all of you for spending your time with us. I love these author events. I could do this all the time, and I could talk to you, Kirkland, for another 2 hours. So
thank you. Very flattered that you chose me to have this conversation with, and it's just great to spend time with you.
Your book's very moving, and I think there's so many points of connection people will find. So Chris, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was going to say, I could listen to you go back and forth and talk about how wonderful Boswell is all evening. But it seems like it's time for me to jump in. Thank you both so much, Kirkland and Christina. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.